My best friend believes that sending me to prison saved his career. He had no idea that was the last mistake he would ever make. 5 years? That is how long it has been since I felt the sun without the shade of razor wire on my flesh. 1,825 days. I counted every single one. In a place like this, you have a lot of time to count. It's time to think. It's time to recall. It's time to plan. Most folks here fantasize of leaving. I fantasize about getting even. From my vantage point by the fence, the world outside is a watercolor painting distorted by the heat coming off the asphalt. Cars travel along the distant highway like blood cells in an artery, each transporting a person with a life, a destination, and a purpose. My objective is simpler. The name is Ethan Vance, a name that tastes like ash in my mouth. It wasn't always this way. 5 years ago, that name was the other half of my Liam and Ethan. Ethan and Liam, we were the twin stars of Silicon Valley, a two-man constellation that shone brighter than anyone else. He was the voice, the face, the captivating salesperson capable of selling ice to an Eskimo. I was the engine, the architect, the hoodie-wearing man who spoke Python fluently and saw the world in code. We built Aegis Dynamics from a garage in Palo Alto to the next big thing. Our kid. This is our ticket to change the world. I can still feel the electric hum in our office from last night. It wasn't much, simply a leased apartment with a slight odor of burnt coffee and ambition. But it was the center of our universe. Whiteboards bled with algorithms so sophisticated that they resembled madman's art. The pizza boxes were heaped like trophies from our sleepless evenings. Athena was in the thick of it all. My Athena, are you burning the midnight oil again? Leo, you are a machine. Ethan's words interrupted my focus. I didn't look up as my fingers continued to dance across the keyboard in a furious, joyous ballad of creation. He dropped a chilled bottle of beer onto the desk near me, and the condensation immediately formed a ring on the crowded surface. I eventually leaned back, the last semicolon slotting into place like the last tumbler in a lock. I cracked my knuckles and grabbed the drink, the cold glass providing a welcome shock against my warm palm. Just polishing the Athena protocol, I said, a tired, victorious grin spreading across my face, the type that only comes when you know you've done something magical. It's perfect, untraceable, and unbreachable. It'll change everything. Athena was more than just a program. She was a work of art, a new cybersecurity system that learns, adapts, and evolves. It didn't just build walls, it also developed a sentient digital immune system. It was my life's labor, the sum of everything I knew and was. Ethan clapped his hand on my shoulder, solid and soothing. He was dressed in a tailored suit, fresh from a dinner with potential investors, whereas I was still wearing the sweatshirt I'd been wearing for 2 days. We were a study of contrasts, but it worked. We are going to change everything, he added, his voice full of the contagious enthusiasm that has carried us this far. What about the Oracle transaction tomorrow? It's only the beginning. He raised his bottle. To Aegis, I said, clinking my bottle on his. Everything was beautiful at that very moment. The code was clean, the future seemed promising, and my best friend was by my side. I had a mission to defend the digital world, a job poised to take off, and a brother I trusted with my life. I had everything that a man could want. Everything to lose. I just didn't realize I was about to lose everything in less than 12 hours. The following morning, the air in the office was different. The odor of stale coffee was replaced by the fresh aroma of new suits and nervous excitement. We were prepared, rehearsed, and ready to sign the contract that would make us legends. I was fixing my tie in the reflection of a server rack when everything came crashing down. The sound resembled a thunderclap. The office door did not open. Rather, it blasted inward, splintering off its hinges. Before the wood chips had settled, the room was packed with males. Big men dressed in black tactical gear with the letters FBI emblazoned in white across their chests. They moved with terrifying, fluid efficiency, holding their weapons low and ready. FBI! Nobody moved. The command rang across the abrupt, deadening silence. My brain, capable of processing millions of lines of code each minute, suddenly ceased to function. It was like attempting to execute a difficult software on a machine that had recently been unplugged. This did not make sense. This was a syntactic problem in the code of reality. Liam Sullivan. One of the agents yelled, his gaze fixed on I felt 100 sets of eyes on me. Our tiny staff of coders and our office manager all looked, their expressions a mix of astonishment and horror. I twisted my head, desperately searching for Ethan. He was standing near the whiteboard, and for a fleeting second, I noticed it. Just a flash, a barely noticeable flicker in his gaze. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't confusion. It was nothing. Cold, flat, reptile blankness. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a mask of expertly produced amazement and fear. He took a single, determined step back, one step away from me. "What is this about?" I stammered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The lead agent moved forward, removing a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The mechanical click sounded louder than the splintering door. "You're under arrest for economic espionage and wire fraud." The words did not make sense. Economic espionage. It sounded like something out of an espionage film, not something that happened in a crowded Palo Alto company. The cold metal bit into my wrists while they cuffed me. My gaze was still fixed on Ethan. "Help me," I begged with my stare. "Tell them it's a mistake. A foolish and absurd mistake." He caught my gaze, his face twisted into a mask of pain. He resembled a man seeing his dearest friend die. It was a great performance. Absolutely flawless. And I understood right then, as they pushed me toward the door, past the shattered shards of our dream. I wasn't sure how or why, but I knew. This was not an error. This was a script. And I was the only person who hadn't read it. The following few weeks were a haze of bland rooms and antiseptic questioning. I was locked in a nightmare created by someone who understands how my mind works. The questioning room felt like a cage. Two agents, a guy and a woman who played good couple bad cop with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, presented their evidence. They showed me printouts of emails made from my computer trying to sell the Athena protocol to a Chinese technology giant. They were obviously fakes, but they were excellent fakes. They used my phrase, private jokes, and identical coding terminology. They showed me the server logs. Fragments of Athena's source code had been uploaded to a foreign server, with the IP address leading back to my home network. The digital breadcrumbs left a flawless, damning trail right to my door. I didn't do this. I said over and over until the words lost their meaning. Somebody framed me. The coding and architecture are sophisticated. You cannot simply copy and paste it. You'd need to be intimately familiar with the entire system. Like you. The nasty cop agent sneered. "Or my partner," I said, my voice rough with desperation. "I'm Ethan Vance. He has access to everything. He understands the system as well as I do." The nice cop agent simply shook her head, a look of sadness on her face. "Mr. Vance has been completely cooperative. He is the one who first spotted the data leak. He is heartbroken, Mr. Sullivan. Heartbroken." The word was like a punch in the gut. The trial was a joke. My court-appointed lawyer was a well-intentioned but overburdened public defender who knew cybersecurity about as well as he did ancient Sanskrit. He was drowning in a sea of technical jargon and fabricated evidence, and the prosecution, backed by the whole force of the United States government, was unrelenting. But the moment that absolutely devastated me, the one that burnt into my soul, was when Ethan stood up. He wore a dark, costly suit, and his face was a painting of grief. He looked at the jurors, his eyes streaming with unshed tears, and began speaking. He talked of our bond, which began in a Stanford dorm room, motivated by cheap pizza and the desire to build something lasting. He depicted me as a brilliant but disturbed genius who was becoming increasingly distant and preoccupied with the idea that we weren't receiving enough respect or money. He told them, his voice shaking with emotion, about the night he discovered the betrayal, how he found the emails, followed the digital trail, and how his heart fell when he understood what his best friend, his brother, had done. "I loved him," Ethan murmured, wiping a tear from his eye and looking straight at me. "I still do. But I also adored Aegis. I cherished our dream of making the world a safer place, and I could not let him ruin it." I sat motionless in my chair, the world fading into dull, thundering static in my ears. It was not simply the lies. It was their artistry. He was using our shared memories as a weapon to destroy me. Every inside joke, late-night talk, every shared dream became part of the prosecution story. He had taken my life and rewritten it, making me the villain in my own story. The rage had subsided. The bewilderment was gone. All that remained was a silent, hollow emptiness. The judge's voice sounded faraway. A threat to national security. A betrayal of trust. Find the defendant, Liam Sullivan, guilty on all counts. The gavel dropped. It sounded like a coffin lid slamming closed. 10 years in a federal penitentiary. As the guards dragged me to my feet, my legs numb and useless, I was no longer Liam Sullivan, the young genius. I was inmate No. 734, a number in a system, a ghost in a machine that I could no longer control. Justice had not merely failed. It was expertly, sadistically, and successfully hacked. And the man behind the keyboard was the person I used to call my brother. The first year inside is intended to break you. It's a systematic removal of everything that defines you. Your name, clothing, preferences, and privacy. You become a creature of habit, governed by bells and buzzers and the guards' icy, apathetic power. The noise is constant, the clanging of steel doors, shouting in the yard, and the murmur of 1,000 solitary desperations. But the silence in your own thoughts is the most audible sound of all. For a while, I allowed myself to break. I passed the days in a fog of disbelief and anguish. I replayed Ethan's testimony in my head thousands of times, looking for a hole in his logic or a crack in his delivery. There were none. It was an excellent example of social engineering, and I had been the objective. He had not gotten into my computer. He had broken into my life, my trust, and utilized the root access I had granted him to install a virus that would destroy me from within. My universe had been built on logic and the exquisite certainty of code. If X, then Y, but there was no logic involved. The system was corrupted. The equation was broken. I had attempted to fight on my own terms, with truth and reason, and had failed terribly. The fog began to lift in the jail library, a dusty, a dimly lighted space that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. It began gently. I was surrounded by men who survived solely on raw force alliances and knowing who to fear and who to trust. I had none of that. My strength had always existed in my imagination, so I chose to rearm. I began reading. However, I did not purchase books on CPUCs or network security. These tools were no longer useful to me. My adversary had not been a machine, but a man. So I needed to understand how males worked. I devoured everything I could discover on psychology. Fred, Jung, and Skinner. I then moved on to sociology, namely literature on crowd dynamics and power systems. I read The Prince by Machiavelli as a technical instruction rather than a historical work. I studied Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I discovered a battered copy of Robert Cialdini's Influencing the Psychology of Persuasion and read it till the spine cracked and the pages came out. I learned about cognitive biases, logical fallacies, authority, scarcity, and social proof. I learned how to establish rapport, construct a pretext, and attach a person's perspective of reality to a narrative I created. I was studying a new type of programming, the source code for human behavior. The vulnerabilities and exploits were not in the software, but in the wetware of the human brain. Greed, fear, paranoia, ego. These were the vulnerabilities, and Ethan Vance was inundated with them. 4 years into my sentence, the spark arrived. I was scrubbing the floor in the library, the regular back and forth a form of meditation, when I noticed him. An old, boxy television in the corner was showing a Bloomberg News piece. The Chiron stated, Han Vancy e Aegis Dynamax CEO wins Innovatar FTGR. And there he was. He was older, sleeker, and had flawlessly coiffed hair. He stood at a podium holding a sleek glass award, the epitome of achievement. He stared at the camera, a humble, charming smile on his lips. I dedicate this award to the original vision of Aegis. He continued, his voice as flawless as polished marble. A vision of a safer digital world for everyone. My vision. My words. He was referring to a chat we had years ago over cheap beer in our garage office. He was selling my soul back to me on national TV. The mop handle groaned under my white-knuckled grip. The other detainees watching TV noticed a tech mogul. I noticed a ghost wearing my life. The dread that had tormented me for years did not just vanish. It underwent a molecular reaction. It flash froze and crystallized into something cold, hard, and sharp. The H had vanished, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. A purpose. He'd built his business on a falsehood, shielded by the strongest digital firewalls money could buy. I recognized then that attempting to break those fortifications was hopeless, a fool's errand. You do not combat a man like Ethan in his world of servers and encryption. You do not attack the fortress. You poison the king. It was impossible to overcome a master manipulator by attacking his computer. You needed to target his mentality. The fire inside of me was no longer raging. It was a cold fusion burning with quiet, patient ferocity. The proposal began to take shape, not in lines of code, but in a flowchart of human weakness. A year later, on a bright autumn morning, the main gate to the penitentiary buzzed open. I stepped outside, squinting in the unfamiliar sunlight. I was dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by the state and holding a little envelope containing the $23 I had earned from my library work. I was officially a free man. I had lost 5 years of my life, my company, my reputation, and my closest friend. But I had gained something much more valuable, like a new education. I did not go back to Palo Alto. The center of my previous life was a graveyard that I had no desire to visit. Instead, I rode the bus to Oakland and slipped into the city's faceless, grimy embrace. I discovered a tight second-floor flat that smelled of wet and desperation. The window stared into a brick wall, and the plumbing groaned like a dying creature. It was perfect. A ghost does not require a penthouse. My command center wasn't particularly appealing. A used laptop purchased for cash from a pawn shop, the webcam covered with black tape, a few cheap, prepaid burner phones, and a wall. The wall quickly became a canvas, a spreading spiderweb of my research. I plastered it with everything I could find about Ethan and Aegis dynamics. News stories, press releases, shareholder reports, and images from society sites. I sketched out the complete firm hierarchy, including the board members, executives, and assistants. I learned their names, roles, and habits. I wasn't only looking for statistics, I was also looking for pressure points. Ethan had created a palace. It was time to begin sprinkling the ground with dragon's teeth. I was not going to hack his systems. I planned to hack his people. The first move has to be unobtrusive, like a pebble thrown into a still pond. The targeted, Ethan's own growing paranoia. I knew him. Success had not calmed him. It had terrified him of losing everything. He was a monarch sitting on a stolen throne, continually looking over his shoulder for the true successor. I only needed to give him a shadow to be terrified of. The attack vector was spear phishing, the practice of sending a convincing, targeted email to deceive a specific person. A typical phishing email is a net, whereas a spearfish is a harpoon. I spent a week on it. I registered a domain name that was a one-letter version of the prominent New York law firm Cravath, Swain & Moore. I created a simple, professional-looking website for it. I made an email address for a fictional senior partner. Then I typed the email. The phrasing was precise, legalese-laden, and intended to sidestep his assistant while triggering his darkest fears. The subject line was a piece of art urgent in privilegion legal communicaton notice of impending litigation for Athena Protocol patent infringement. The body of the email was brief, nasty, and to the point. It claimed that a mysterious consortium had acquired the original, pre-Aegis intellectual property rights to the core of the Athena Protocol and was planning a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit to not only bankrupt the firm, but also examine its underlying past. It was pure fiction, but it was based on the one truth that haunted Ethan at all times: Athena's genuine origin. I pressed send and waited. I ran a simple network traffic analyzer from a public Wi-Fi hotspot and targeted at Aegis servers. I was not trying to get in. I was simply watching the ripples. For hours, nothing. Then a spike. A significant spike in internal data transport. Ethan was in a panic. He wasn't simply calling his lawyers. He was transferring files, burying data, and attempting to conceal the digital skeletons of his betrayal. In his rush to cover his tracks, he showed me the map to his riches. I noticed the directory hierarchies, file naming conventions, and security protocols that he was enabling. It was as if he had turned on every light in his stronghold for me. Phase 1 was completed. I now had a plan for his digital life. The following phase necessitated a human touch. The target was Carol Petrov, Aegis Chief Financial Officer. Carol, according to my investigation, is in her late 50s, a company loyalist, precise, and comes from an older school of management. She was good with mathematics, but she probably saw the details of IT security as a necessary irritation. She was in charge of the company's finances. In a burst of renewed inspiration, I purchased a new burner phone and installed speech modification software that I had built myself. It could modify my pitch, tone, and cadence in real time. I practiced for an hour, molding my voice into someone I called David. Calm, professional, somewhat stressed, the voice of every overworked IT support specialist on the planet. I scheduled the call at 4:55 p.m. on Friday. A great moment of vulnerability. Carol would be exhausted, anxious to begin her weekend, and less likely to adhere to tight security protocols if confronted with a sufficiently pressing problem. This is known as pretexting, constructing a plausible scenario to trick someone into disclosing information. She answered the second ring. Carol Petrov. Hi, Carol, this is David Miller from Oracle's critical support team. I began, my voice a silky baritone of corporate care. I'm so sorry to bother you at the end of the day, but we've detected a severe vulnerability in the API connecting your internal payment gateway to our database. We need to patch it immediately to prevent potential data corruption. I employed a bombardment of technical jargon, asynchronous token mismatch, SQL injection vulnerability, zero-day exploit. Knowing that she would be overwhelmed, I conveyed a sense of urgency and power. I was Oracle. I was here to help. Oh my, she exclaimed, her voice taut with alarm. What do you need me to do? I need to walk you through a manual reset of the gateway credentials from your end. It's the only way to secure the channel. I patiently told you. For security, the system will generate a temporary alphanumeric access key. Could you please read it back to me so I can verify the handshake on my end? There was a pause, a small sliver of mistrust. This was the critical moment. I really shouldn't be giving out access information over the phone, she said, her training kicking in. You are absolutely right to be cautious, Carol, I remarked, my voice full of praise. And normally, we would never ask, but the logs show a potential breach in progress. We either lock it down now, or I have to recommend a full system shutdown for the entire weekend to contain it. Mr. Vance would have to be notified, of course. I had just given her two options, a 5-minute fix or a disastrous weekend, and having to explain everything to an already worried CEO. I had anchored her decision. I heard a small click on her keyboard. Okay, she sighed. The temporary login is Alpha 739er Zulu. I entered the credentials into a gateway that I uncovered during Ethan's hurried file transfer. A simple login screen appears. I entered the temporary key. Access is granted. Perfect handshake confirmed. I replied quietly as my screen filled with proprietary financial data from Aegis Dynamics. We're secure. Thank you for your quick action, Carol. You may have just saved the company a major headache. Oh, thank goodness, she exclaimed, relief filling her voice. Thank you, David, I replied, just doing my job, with a frigid smile on my lips. I ended the call. I wasn't only inside the castle anymore. I was at the treasury. The final piece of the infiltration puzzle was the most daring, a traditional piece of baiting. I required a permanent presence within their network, a concealed backdoor that would not be noticed by their security sweeps. For that, I needed someone on the inside to unintentionally open the door for me. I discovered through social media snooping that a group of mid-level Aegis engineers held a weekly happy hour at a beautiful, pricey bar in Soma. I purchased a regular USB flash drive and loaded it with a single, little, custom-written piece of malware. It was a rootkit, meant to be virtually invisible, a digital ghost that would grant me complete remote access to any machine it infected. The genius was not in the code itself, but in its packaging. I used a label maker to print a single line on a sticker for the drive. Q4 layoffs and executive bonus list confidential. It was the perfect bait, combining the two most powerful motivators in any business environment: fear and greed. Fear of losing your job and a want to know how much the bosses were making. It was enticing. I proceeded to the bar, got a club soda, and sat down in a corner booth. The Aegis team entered, noisy and raucous, moaning about deadlines and enjoying the end of the week. I waited until they were a few rounds in before walking past their table on my way to the washroom. With a slight, practiced move, I let the USB drive slip from my pocket and land on the floor near their table, just noticeable enough to be found. I did not glance back. I paid for my drink and departed. I was nervous the entire way back to my flat. Will someone pick it up? Would they be foolish enough to connect it to a work computer? Back in my command center, I peered at my laptop screen, which displayed a simple command line interface waiting for a signal. For 2 hours, there was nothing. My heart fell. Perhaps it was overly clear. Perhaps they converted it into security. And then it occurred. A fresh line of text appeared on the screen. Connection was formed. Root access is provided to Aegis Internal Nanette. A slow, frigid sense of victory swept over me. I sat back in my chair, the groan of the cheap wood like a symphony. Someone's curiosity had gotten the best of them. The Trojan horse was within the city walls. I no longer had only eyes and ears. My hands were on the controls. I could see everything, each email, each instant message, all financial transactions. I watched them work, listened to their chatter, and learned about their goals, resentments, and secrets. Ethan believed his firewalls were comprised of code and silicon. He was wrong. They were composed of people. And I discovered that humans are quite vulnerable to hacking. The board was set. The pieces were in place. It was time to begin the game. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I was the ghost in the machine, a whisper in the server, and Ethan was my only audience. My intention was not to steal money or data. Its purpose was to destroy trust, which is essential for an empire to survive. I started tiny. An anonymous tip to a tech site revealed the facts of a modest, unanticipated product delay. The news resulted in a little drop in Aegis shares and a flurry of internal communications, which I read with great interest. I noticed Ethan's anxious communications to his head of public relations, wanting to discover the source of the leak. Paranoia was taking root. Then I targeted the executive team's wiki ghosts. Using my access, I quietly changed the statistics in a preliminary quarterly report that only the VPs could see. I increased the marketing department's budget while significantly cutting the RD budget. It was a tiny adjustment, one that would be fixed before the official release, but the harm had been done. I reviewed chat records while the VP of Engineering accused the VP of Marketing of backdoor deals. The seeds of strife were sprouting. Carol, the CFO I deceived over the phone, became an unsuspecting pawn. I used my access to her banking systems to make a huge, unexpected payment to a new, unknown vendor in the Cayman Islands, scheduling the transaction for 2 weeks in the future. Then I sent an anonymous email to the head of the board's audit committee, implying that he should closely examine the CFO's impending transactions for offshore problems. Carol's reputation would be called into question, and Ethan's circle of trust would shrink even more. Ethan was becoming a prisoner within his own corner office. I was his warden. I listened to his phone calls and read his personal emails to his wife, lawyer, and therapist. I knew he was not sleeping. I knew he was drinking too much. I knew he felt a creeping dread, as if he was being watched, manipulated, and stalked. He was a man in a soundproof room yelling, unaware that the sound was originating from inside his own skull. His paranoia had reached its peak. I observed a captured instant messaging exchange between him and his senior VP of operations. Akong, somebody is playing games with me. They are inside. I can feel it. VP8, our security staff reports that the network is clean. There are no breaches. At Han, the security team is ineffective. This is not a brute force attack. It is a ghost. I don't care how much it costs. Hire Prometheus Security. They're the top ghost hunters in the business. My heart pounded against my ribcage. This was it. The core of my entire strategy. The moment I'd been working toward. Prometheus Security, a corporation with a polished, professional website, impressive-sounding white papers on cyber, threat intelligence, and flattering testimonials from phony customers. A corporation with a dedicated business phone line and a renowned, if virtual, office address in San Francisco's financial sector. A corporation that did not exist outside of the server that I managed. A corporation I founded 2 months ago, waiting for this very occasion. My burner phone rang. The number was registered to Prometheus Security. I took a deep breath, triggered the speech modulator, and responded. My voice was clear, professional, and incisive. The voice of a man who costs $500 per hour. Prometheus Security. How should we direct your call? The irony was so thick I could taste it. Ethan Vance, the great manipulator, was now hired his own victim to track for the ghost that was tormenting him. The monarch, scared of the poison, had recently invited the royal poisoner to dinner. The following 2 weeks were a dark, exciting masquerade. As the lead investigator from Prometheus, I spoke with Ethan every day. He granted me unlimited and uncontrolled access to his whole digital existence, assuming that I was his savior. He poured forth his anxieties, suspicions, and speculations. I listened quietly, my modulated voice providing calm, expert reassurance, even while my true self sat in a shabby Oakland apartment, meticulously planning his demise. I gave him bogus, investigative reports, replete with complicated charts and technical jargon. These reports were masterpieces of misinformation. I built a digital phantom, a hypothetical hacker working for a competing technology company, and placed subtle, debatable evidence pointing in their direction. I fed Ethan's paranoia, giving it a name and a face, and channeled his wrath and dread precisely where I wanted it to go. He was quite thankful. He labeled me a genius. He said I was the only person he could trust. He was a puppet, and I, his tormentor, was tugging the strings. But it was time to trim them. It was time for the closing act. "Ethan, we have a breakthrough," I announced on one of our calls, my Prometheus voice tinged with enthusiasm. "Our Phantom is getting desperate. He's made a mistake, but we have an opportunity to turn this entire situation to your advantage." "What is it?" "Anything," he asked, his voice strained. "Through my back channels," I whispered. "I've made contact with a representative for a private consortium of investors based in Singapore. They see the instability at Aegis not as a weakness, but as a hostile takeover opportunity. They're willing to make a massive offer, buy out the company, take it private, and clean house. It would save the company and make you an incredibly wealthy man, your golden parachute." I could hear him take a sharp inhale. Greed is the oldest and most consistent vulnerability of all. What's the catch? The lead investor is old school. He values integrity above all else. He wants a private, face-to-face video conference with you. Just you and him. He needs to look you in the eye and hear, from the source, the true origin story of Aegis and the Athena Protocol. He needs to know the man he's betting on. It's a test of your transparency. It was a great trap. I was promising him everything he desired. Escape, fortune, validation. For the sole price of the one secret he had sacrificed our friendship to guard. I knew his ego. I recognized his greed. He would never be able to turn down the opportunity to spin his own myth one last time. "Set it up," he stated, his voice steely. "I'll tell him everything he needs to hear." The day of the call, I was in my element, the culmination of 5 years of waiting and planning. My setup was easy. I was running a deepfake algorithm in real time, using public photographs and videos of a well-known Singaporean businessman to construct a lifelike avatar. I had routed the video conference through a number of shell servers, rendering it absolutely untraceable. Most significantly, I used my root access to Ethan's computer to control his webcam and microphone, as well as to add a tiny, nearly invisible overlay to the corner of his screen. He appeared on my monitor, seated in his spectacular corner office, with the San Francisco skyline behind him. He appeared confident and powerful. The king is at his palace, preparing for his final victory. My deepfake avatar emerged on the screen, "Mr. Vance." My modulated voice said, this time with a mild Singaporean accent, "My consortium values integrity above all. Before we proceed, we need to understand the true origin of the Athena Protocol. Tell me, how did one man develop something so revolutionary alone?" Ethan smiled. I'd seen the same charming, predatory smile 1,000 times before. He smiled at investors, the media, and the jurors. A smile from a man who believed his own falsehoods. "Well," he said, reclining back in his chair, smugly satisfied. "It's a complicated story. My partner, Liam, he was brilliant, a true artist. But he was naive, he couldn't see the big picture. The business. He wanted to give Athena away, make it open source. Can you imagine?" He chuckled in a dry, contemptuous tone. "Sometimes, for the greater good, for the survival of a vision, you have to. Remove a variable from the equation. I did what I had to protect the company. I built Aegis into what it is today. Me. Alone." He'd confessed. It was more than I had hoped for. The final piece of the puzzle fit into place. My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, executing the final command. The trap has sprung. The image of the Singaporean investor faded away on Ethan's screen in a pixelated blur. It did not resolve to static. It resolved into a face he hadn't seen in almost 5 years, my face. Older, harder, and unmistakably me. I peered at him through the screen, my demeanor frigid and flat. "Hello, Ethan," I said. My actual voice, unfiltered, unmodulated. The voice of the ghost he'd been tracking. Confusion flooded over his face, a dissonant mix of emotions. His smile wavered. His eyes flew across the screen, attempting to process the impossible. Then he saw it. The little overlay in the bottom corner of his screen, which I had activated moments ago. It was a small, red box with a white play button icon. And next to it, a number that was increasing at an exponential rate. Live 27,458 viewers. His mind, quick and acute, finally connected the dots. Prometheus Security, the Phantom Hacker, a Singaporean investor. Me, it was all me. His visage, the well-crafted mask of a CEO and industrial behemoth, simply fell apart. The color disappeared from his skin, leaving it pasty and sickly gray. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. It was the expression of a man who understood he wasn't simply in a trap, he had purposefully built it, baited it, and walked straight into it. The viewer count increased steadily, 15,100, 2,000, 2,000. News outlets, tech bloggers, industry rivals, Aegis employees, the entire globe was tuned in. He'd spent years crafting a story, a deception so magnificent it became the truth. And in a single, pompous tirade, he had smashed the entire foundation. He had not been hacked. He had not been exposed. He had openly confessed to the entire world. He had ended his own career with his own words. His fortification had not been breached. He'd unlocked the gates and invited the enemy inside for tea. My revenge was complete. The aftermath was a tidal wave. I saw it all from the calm shelter of my Oakland apartment, like a silent deity viewing the universe he had just created. The live stream went viral before it even ended. The video of Ethan's confession was broadcast on every news station and discussed on every tech forum. Aegis Exposed became a worldwide trending topic. The montage depicting his collapse was more satisfying than any movie. I saw grim-faced news anchors on CNN and Fox Business reporting on the corporate scandal of the decade. And I followed the Aegis stock ticker Aegis on a financial news website. It wasn't a dip, but a cliff. The line became nearly vertical and plunged into obscurity. I witnessed cell phone film of incensed investors and board members running out of the Aegis headquarters, their faces distorted with wrath. And now for the final image. A television helicopter captured footage of Ethan being carried from his glass and steel office tower in handcuffs. The costly suit was rumpled, the perfect hair was a tangle, and the attractive grin was vanished, replaced with a hollow, blank look. He wasn't a titan anymore. He was merely a man in a suit, a regular criminal, a scam artist whose luck had run out. He appeared small, insignificant. There was no party at my apartment, no fist pump or triumphant cry. I simply watched the news program to the end, then began to wipe the slate clean. I dragged every file, program, and scrap of data relating to my 5-year plan to the trash bin on my laptop's desktop. The false Prometheus website, speech modulation software, deepfake algorithm, hidden recordings, and network backdoors. Everything. I clicked the icon. A little dialog box appeared. Were you sure you want to permanently erase these items? I clicked empty trash. The progress bar filled up in less than a second. And with that, the apparition vanished. Every digital footprint I had left over the last year was gone. Prometheus security has ceased to exist. The phantom hacker was no more. All that remained was the wreckage. I slumped back, the silence of the room pressing against me. I'd won. I'd gotten the justice that the system had denied me. The win felt peaceful. It wasn't the explosive release I'd expected. It was a chilly clean, an empty pleasure. To accomplish my goal, I had to become a manipulator myself. I had missiled to people like Carol and taken advantage of innocent employees' worries. I had to become a monster in order to hunt one. Justice had been served, but at a costing a piece of the man I once was. The next morning, I was standing on the Golden Gate Bridge. The sun was barely rising, bathing the sky in beautiful orange and pink. The chilly, salty wind blew around me, leaving me feeling clean and true. I saw the city across the bay start to awaken, a sprawling circuit board of lights and people. I was no longer an inmate. I was no longer the victim. But I was not a hero either. I was simply a man who had balanced a bad equation. I was a ghost in the system, a free man with no name, no past, and no defined future. They say that revenge is best served cold. I took a long breath of the crisp morning air, the first really free breath I'd had in 5 years. I have to confess, it tastes better than I expected. But as I stood there watching the new day begin, a single, unmistakable idea occurred. There was a terrible aftertaste. I turned away from the sunrise and began to walk, blending into the anonymous morning crowd, just another face heading toward a future that I now had to rebuild from the ashes.